Hello, welcome back, everyone. Good evening. It's nice to see you here. Tonight, we are really happy to have Nancy Friedemann-Sánchez with us from Nebraska. We have people coming from a lot of different places so far this year, so it's very exciting. My colleague, Joan Linder, in drawing, will be introducing her, but by saying that we would like to acknowledge the land on which the University at Buffalo operates, which is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty of Peace and Friendship, a pledge to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. It is also covered by the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua between the United States government and the Six Nations Confederacy, which further affirmed Haudenosaunee land rights and sovereignty in the state of New York. Today, this region is still the home to the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. Please join me in welcoming Joan Linder to the stage.
Well, thank you everybody for coming here tonight for Nancy's talk. I am super excited to introduce her and so happy that she is here all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska, which is quite a hike, however you cut it. I met Nancy over 25 years ago through her now husband, Charlie Friedemann, who's also an artist. And when I met her, I found out she was making these very large scale drawings on Mylar paper with text. And the text was like marks and words. And she was a self-proclaimed feminist. And I was so intrigued by the work and so excited about it. I hadn't seen anybody doing work like that. I followed her work ever since. It has evolved and changed, and I'm really excited to hear what she has to say about it. She is a Colombo-American mid-career artist with an interdisciplinary practice. She grew up in Colombia as a child of Colombian and a U.S. citizen and migrated to the United States as an adult, where she studied art. Her art is about the curious and intense experience of having physically migrated, yet still having a piece of herself rooted in Colombia. She's creating an intersectional feminist visual novel that is a multifaceted project comprised of paintings, sculptures, objects, and mixed media that together and in different voices weave a synchronicity of dialogues, passages, and punctuations about hybridity and cultural ownership. She has been awarded many, many prizes, exhibitions. I will name some of them. The Doctorow Prize in Painting, a Smithsonian Artist Fellowship, a Puffin grant, a Pollock-Krasner Foundation grant, a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant, and most recently, the U.S. Latinx Fellowship for 25-26. She's done artist residencies at OMI, the Fountainhead, Tamarind, Yaddo, Gasworks, Bemis, and the Bronx Museum, to name a few. She's also she's in the Elizabeth Sackler Feminist Art Base at the Brooklyn Museum. She's participated in just so many exhibitions. La Experiencia Intelectual de la Mujeres in El Silo in 2012 in Mexico City. She's shown at the Utah Museum, the Nerman Museum of Art, the Miami Museum of Contemporary Art, Blue Star Contemporary, the Bemis Center, La Bienal de Cuenca in Ecuador, the Sheldon Museum of Art, and the Joslyn Museum of Art, the Portland Museum of Art, El Museo del Barrio, and the Bronx Museum of Art in New York City. She currently has an exhibition up right now at the Everson Art Museum in Syracuse, a solo show that will be up through October 18th. If any of you are able to get down there and want to see this work in person, you can do that. And I really like, there was just a small review in Hyperallergic where they said the title Dream Map and Cornucopia reminds me of the fall season itself, and it also describes Colombian-American artist Nancy Friedemann-Sánchez's work, overflowing with organic energy and the promise of growth. Her large-scale ink works and delightful clay sculptures fill the Everson Museum of Art with a mythical, magical energy. So not only does she work on her practice, but also with her husband, Charlie Friedemann. Nancy and Charlie together run Fiendish Plots, which is an artist-run initiative and exhibition space that hosts interdisciplinary exhibitions, salons, and critiques of seasoned artists in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Brooklyn, New York. So those are some of the things that Nancy does. And with that, Nancy, let's welcome her and let's start to hear about you.
Thank you, Joan. There. Hello, everybody. It is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for this invitation. And perhaps to start, I'll just give you a little bit of bio to give you some context of where the work comes from and how it, how I got there. And also, maybe I'll talk about the work in regards of how the work has grown. And because most of you here are students, it's kind of a mirror of how you can develop work and build a career. So as Joan said, I was born in that going? Sorry. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and well, you fix that, I'll tell the story.
Okay.
So I was born in Bogota. My dad is from the US, and my mother was Colombian. She passed away. And my mother was an anthropologist, and I spent a lot of years of my childhood going to the places where she was doing field work. And I think that gave me a sense of how Colombia had a huge diversity of people, and also how unequal it was. And my mother was a professional. I also spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who was more of a traditional woman, like a mother with a role that was very, kind of like with, taking care of the home and taking care of her grandchildren. So I had those two role models, and I think that I developed a sense of a question of what it was to be a woman and how to, what I wanted to be in the future. My dad, as a US citizen living in Colombia, he always showed me the country from his perspective and always had a different way of seeing that was not like, he was like a fish out of water. So I always had that. I grew up in between English and Spanish, between cultures, and my work has always been in that bridge in between those places. And so the work I'm going to show you, in 1991, I left for the US for the last time. I had been back and forth from Colombia to the US because of my privileged status of being half American and half Colombian. And so the last time was 1991, and I left along many thousands of Colombian professionals that were fleeing the malignant, narcissistic reign of Pablo Escobar and the narcos that were governing the country, basically, from, proxy. They were bombing, and it was really tearing the country apart. And I was pushed by my family to leave. A lot of my family left. My sister survived a bomb. Later, many things. The war touched everybody in Colombia. There's not a Colombian that can say to you, nothing has touched me of this conflict. Everybody has been in some way touched, from those events. And so I left for the US. I left for New York, and I had work. Many jobs, the jobs that you do when you're an artist. And I went to NYU. At NYU, and going back to feminism, I had brought with me a doily that my grandmother did, a little crochet doily. And I got a studio very early on. And this is the work that I was doing in grad school. I took this little crochet doily and I expanded it. I went to the store and I bought this long roll of canvas, and I wrapped it around my wall, And I started drawing on it. All the underpainting is all texts from boleros, from songs, romantic songs by Luis Miguel. And it was my way of kind of like putting in the back those feelings of loss that I was feeling of having to leave my country when I really didn't want to. And in front, I'm making these kind of like structures made of crochet doilies, one on top of the other, and thinking very much about what I was studying in school, which was all of the New York School of Painting. I was really trying to see all the galleries, understand New York and understand the US art world in a way where I could later function, because the work that I had brought and that I was making when I moved to the States was work that didn't function in the States. It just was not understood. It was always placed, it was like out of context. And I was really trying to think, how do I fit in my new home? How do I really enter this society? When I graduated, I continued this. I did this piece at Yaddo. Applied to residencies immediately, right after school. Residency, just to stay active. Because once you're out of school, it's like an abyss. You have your cohort, you have your friends, and then it's like, oh my God, how do I keep the practice up? How do I not fall into the job? And so I went to Yaddo and I continued doing surrounding the idea of the crochet doily, but I started making these drawings on Mylar. And I turned, instead of doing like the stitch of a doily, I started using text. And here I was translating poems by Sylvia Plath. So writing has always been in the work. It always pops in from the side, underneath, as underpainting, and always inside of the structure of the work. And this piece is called Maps. It's not as big as the other piece, but it's like maybe like 20 feet. It's long, maybe like this, like here, like the screen size. That's a detail of it. And then I did a residency. So I got married to Charlie Friedemann, and in 2001, I did I got married in 2001, and then I went to London to do a residency at Gasworks. And there I started visiting the Victoria and Albert Museum and looking at their lace collection and their crochet collection and all of the women's work that they have an incredible case after case of these beautiful works. And then walking through neighborhoods in London and seeing all these curtains, these polyester curtains that people had on their walls. And I thought, oh, I'm going to make myself a drawing, some drawings one of these days. I became pregnant. I had an offer for a solo show in New York. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And I rolled up in my table at home these doilies, these curtains, and I started tracing these pieces with ink. And I made this piece. It's called Byzantine Grid. I can't remember, it's around, I have the measurement in centimeters, but it's a large piece. It's not as big as this screen, but it's a large piece. And here it is at the Museo del Barrio. And here I was thinking of minimalism. Here I'm still thinking about the US. I'm thinking about the different movements that have been dominating the scene in the US. So I was thinking of minimalism. I was thinking of the pattern and decoration movement. I was thinking of women's work. And what I decided was to sign it, that the signature would be very visible, as in not being anonymous, as so many women's works are, which are, you see museums filled with, and collections filled with pieces that have no signature. I did this also while having an infant. This is called, and of course I did it for pleasure. And it's a mixture. The work here becomes more, there are like holes in it. There's a different management of the space. And it's a large drawing. And again, it was while having, having a tiny little baby at home. So I was envisioning these large scale pieces, but thinking them for big exhibition spaces. And this work traveled to Bogota and back to New York. And I was experimenting with how is the work perceived in Bogota and how is the work perceived in New York. And in 2007, I got invited to do a residency at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And that's where I started doing a whole research on lace, but little by little doing research on botanical colonial illustrations. And what I found in the lace, in all of the collections of lace, was that many of these collections were cared for by volunteers. And many of those volunteers were teachers that were retired, like math teachers. I was interested in why math teachers, because to make this requires a lot of knowledge of math. And it was a lot of women who had been, math retired teachers in schools who were taking care, volunteering, unpaid labor that was taking care of these collections at the Smithsonian Institution. Basically, the government did not have enough money to care for these works. And I thought, wow, division of labor, right? So this is Fago at Night, the Rottweiler's Tide, large scale works, 96 by 150. And here at some point, I thought I really want to look at my own history and where I came from and what is it that populates my aesthetic brain. And I was thinking of all of the colonial paintings, the religious paintings that exist in churches, in people's collections, in the history of Colombia. And I started looking at a lot of these works and beginning to think of the botanical illustrations and thinking of landscape and lace, connecting it to my collection of lace that I had photographed at the Smithsonian. I photographed hundreds of samples. This is thinking of the colonial botanical expedition of 1786 that occurred in Colombia, which was at the time called the Nueva Granada. And I started creating these large-scale abstract landscapes with passifloras. And passiflora is the Latin name. I was having a conversation with a student earlier. The Latin name for a flower that probably had a different name before the Spanish arrived, different name by the Muisca. And I was thinking about how those botanical illustrations were done as part of a colonial project, meaning that when you go and you send your naturalists, your scientists to go and record the flora or the fauna of the area that is being colonized, it's a way of not only of naming it, but of taking it for yourself. So I became interested in this. Again, poetry. This is by Violeta Parra. That's a Chilean poet and songwriter who was writing during the dictature of Pinochet. And so I showed you, I did different works. Showed you just a couple of those different eras. So that era finished with this commission that I did for Celebrity Cruises. That's a ship that sails in the summer in the north of Europe. In the winter, it comes to the Caribbean. And I was given a whole room to make a drawing and a floor. I designed the floor. It was sandblasted in this beautiful Italian granite. They had like you can't imagine the budget, a moon, a vase. The CEO came and said, well, this installation needs a 3D thing. So can you design a vase? And the gallery that I was working with at the time said, oh, I have a contact with LALIC. Can you make a drawing? And in 5 minutes, I made a drawing. I was on the ship. in Eemshaven in the north of Holland. Oh, and then I worked with it just has music. So I worked with a sound engineer and a composer for it to have music. Because at the end, so what happens, because I was in Eemshaven, turn the volume down. Ah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
You can make.
Yeah. So because I was there, so each artwork, you end up responding to it because of what the environment gives you. So I was thinking of Spanish colonial, but here comes the director of the gallery and says, you know, I need a vase and I have this contact and can you do this? And then we need a moon and what? And then the CEO comes and says, well, what else do you want to do? I was like, okay, well, how about sound? And I said sound because I was up there. Eemshaven is, imagine in the north of Holland, on the North Sea. I mean, this is the land of no nature. It's all this foamy black sea, and you are there. And I was meeting everybody that worked on that ship, everybody, from the people that were mopping to the captain, to everybody. And there are 57 nationalities, and everybody would say, oh, I just miss land. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to put in here the sounds of, I mean, we won't listen to the whole thing, but eventually they're birds, they're frogs. And so when you go in there, it's this kind of experience of being with all of these creatures in water and so that was it. And then I moved to Nebraska. Lots of things. You decide to make moves like this. Looking here at Joan, who knows the history. So I moved to Nebraska, and I moved there because we had a child. We were living in Brooklyn, and then we decided to get a dog, and that broke it. That was like when you're bringing your dog to pee at 11 o'clock at night from a third floor apartment. It was like, oh my God, are we artists or are we New Yorkers? And how are we going to continue this life? So I moved to Nebraska, and in Nebraska, I spent some time doing some work, still doing the colonial illustration type piece, doing the lace. That phone there is the phone in my parents' house. So every trip to Colombia, I bring back something. I just bring back a piece of my memory of home. And that's a detail of that. And at some point being there, walking a lot, doing a lot of thrifting, picking up things from, the yard or people, out in the alleys, I decided to, and listening to a book, I did various things to cope. I was reading a lot, and I listened to a book by this Chilean writer that lived in Mexico, exiled. It's called The Savage Detectives. And this novel was kind of narrated in 40 voices. And I thought, oh my God, I really don't want to be known as the artist that the lace person, And I thought, no, our narratives as people, they're so complicated and they're complex, and there's so much to that. I'm going to do this in different voices. I'm going to if I decide to make a sculpture, I'm going to make a sculpture and not have to commit to one kind of work. And so I started doing all kinds of things. I also took a class at the university. I took a literature class because I was like, I'm not going to take an art class, but maybe if I go on to the side, I'll gain something from other people that are working in a parallel place, but with a different way of understanding the world. I mean, that's what we do as artists, right? It's try to make sense of our world. and I took a class called US and Chicana, US Latina and Chicana literature. And we were reading novels and reading theory at the same time, reading Gloria Anzaldúa, Borderlands, reading Sheila Sandoval, and these different, and reading novels. And it was like it was a mind opening. It added to the research that I was doing, but it really helped me place the work in a way that was less personal and more connected to something bigger. And so I started on this journey of this visual novel. And my studio was next to a shop where they paint cars. So I made some stretchers made of metal, and I had them painted with black paint. And this is very shiny. It's like a mirror surface. And I put a piece of driftwood and a little bird that I picked up from a store, from like a thrift store. And I did a bunch of works like that. Just playful, like not thinking of not thinking career, not thinking, just kind of like, I'm just going to put this here. I'm in Carland. I'm in, my neighbor does this. I'm going to utilize the things that are around me. And then I started, playing with pedestals, more driftwood, an anonymous artisan. The idea of the anonymous artisan I've always been interested in. Those works that are, that are art, but that we don't think of them as art, as high art, and placing them. Then I made these works called Leaning Chumbes, inspired in these Colombian traditions of indigenous belts. And I made these abstract paintings that lean kind of like like a minimalist US painting. So thinking about indoctrination, hybridity. Again, the idea of the textile. So each one is a tiny little brush, but they're abstractions. And then thinking of, well, if I am so inspired by John McCracken, why can't I be inspired in the indigenous crafts of Colombia? And then I started really looking in that direction and how to lean into the things that I grew up with. I went back to my research at the Smithsonian, and I did these large scale drawings. This is 135 by 270 inches. And it's a large scale drawing about a flood. The Midwest had been flooded that year. But it also kind of harkens back to the drawings I was doing when my daughter was born. Being able to, I had done that in a residency in Mexico, so I had to take the work in a tube. And I've done so much traveling back and forth between Colombia and the US that I've developed a way of working that is very large scale, but that I can put in a tube and store it and travel with it. So a lot of ideas about migration also have kind of transported themselves to my own art making. And this, we had a show in Germany with my husband, Charlie. And this is one of the chapters, Travelers and Settlers. I picked up some pieces of wood from different places. That the big boat in the front was a piece of wood I found between my house and the neighbors. Then the iron used to belong to my grandmother, and she probably, when she was little, they would iron with that, putting coal in there. She was born in 1912. This here is a conquistador's stirrup, and the little figure in the back is a little pre-Columbian figure that I smuggled back to my house. And then the pieces in the back, they're made of pearls. So I embroidered these pieces they're settlers. They're also called, each one is called Self-Portrait with Papaya. And so they're like fruits made of pearls. And so these are made chopsticks and a little piece of drop cloth. So the whole idea of mixing the high and low, putting museum pieces with works that you find the stirrups, the horseshoes from Bogota's houses by the fireplaces. It's amazing that they still exist. People use them just for decorating fireplaces, and it's like the living history of the conquest and the colony right there. And I brought one with me, and it's there. And this is this is painted with car paint, so it's so shiny. You just see your reflection there. So they're kind of like ancestors. They are they're fruit. Papaya, giving papaya in Colombia, it's a little bit like you're a sucker. It's a pun. It's private. It's like, for me, it has like so many elements that don't really are out there in the explained in the work exactly, but they are, for me, they have meaning. And then I started doing an investigation on Barniz de Pasto. This is a colonial example of Barniz de Pasto. And I was interested in this because when the Spanish arrived, they, very soon after, they started doing commerce with Asia. So they were taking, and I'm just going to say South America, they were taking the silver from Peru, the gold from Colombia, the plants, the chocolate from Mexico, everything from the plants, the naming, the botanicals, here we go. And they were taking it to Asia, bringing back porcelain, Chinese lacquer, silk. And when they arrived to the south of Colombia, they found that there was this tradition that looked a little bit like Chinese lacquer. And Chinese lacquer was very prized. And so there starts a new tradition called Barniz de Pasto, and where indigenous people were asked to make objects that would mimic European objects. But imagine an indigenous person asked to make a peony or a bird from Europe. Something completely different is going to come out. And I'm very interested in this until now, because you might have a culture squishing another one, but there's always going to be resistance. And I'm interested in that resistance. Historically, I've been interested in it personally, as a female in the art world, as a person that migrated to the US, as a US Colombian, blah, blah, back and forth. And for me, it's amazing how that appears in material culture. So I can see the places here that are of imposition, and I can see the places that are of resistance. So, for example, I think the geometry is indigenous. The flatness, the kind of pictographic quality that this has, ends up being a way of I will do what you tell me to do, but I will do it in my own way. So here you can see the double-headed eagle of the Habsburgs, but you can see the geometry up there on the edge. That's indigenous. And so I started making works inspired by this, in some way mimicking, because that's how cultural memory, for me, that's how cultural memory is learned and transmitted. And that's how we learn as humans, right? We learned how to speak, imitating our parents. We learn, it's all by copying. And so I decided with Barniz de Pasto to look at it and how it was made. And it's basically a collage made of a resin that grows. It's a bud that grows in a tree in the Putumayo Basin. And it has been for 1,000 years, been harvested, boiled, stretched, colored, and then it is placed over an object. And I can't do that in my studio in Nebraska. So what I've done in order to apprehend that history has been to photograph many objects from the colony and look at them, study them, and create my own compositions that speak of that history. So every flower and every animal has been looked at in some kind of object. These are collages. They are done on Tyvek. Tyvek is a contemporary material, and they are all cut, each one individually and pasted. And this showed at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art. Now it's at the Museum of Nebraska Art. Those are details. So I'm thinking, so the idea of the cornucopia. The cornucopia it's connected to this notion the earth is therefore kind of our eternal taking, correct? That we can just perhaps supply whatever is missing with technological innovation, but that we can extract forever. I mean, it's the colonial principle that we still continue until today. So the work speaks to that a great deal, and it shows the absurdity of shooting at flowers, shooting at animals. Chapter 5 is river. Again, I go back to my research at the Smithsonian. This was at the Sioux City Art Center, and I made this large-scale drawing of lace. But this time, different to the other piece that you saw before, I decided to call this piece river. But I thought, in order to make this into a river, like a flood, you really need to paint it in a different way. It can't be like the liney drawing of the past. So I got these brushes that really kind of hold the ink, and every bit of mark was kind of like very watery. So the ink just kind of like, it just kind of flowed in and again, it's like the landscape turns into trash pile, into flood, back into landscape. And then I went to Mexico and I did a residency in Puebla. And I had to thought about the casta paintings, but I really, in spending a month in Puebla, I was walking through all of the churches and through the towns and just seeing, like, you know, you go to Cholula, which is a town outside Puebla, and there are the churches built on top of the temples, the angels that are all, you know, they're Christian angels, but they're all indigenous faces. So it's similar to the idea of the Barniz de Pasto. And during the colony, and you know, when you enter a church and there's a Jesus, but the Jesus is really brown. And it's that hybridity, that miscegenation that occurred, and that it's still living because those paintings exist in those churches, and people walk into those churches to worship. So during the colony, there were some artists that were commissioned to paint the racial mixture that was happening in Mexico, which was called at that time Nueva España, the New Spain. And so this became like a fad to make these paintings that were showing like what is going on there. They were recording the nature, recording the plants, and so this genre of painting had a big development, which then moved on to Peru, and so they made a categorization of 16. And I decided to make my own. This is an example. Usually it would be, so you see Español con India, you get mestizo. Mestizo con Española, you get castizo. And I decided to make my own. And I invited different Latina women, friends, to pose in the studio. I would trace them, usually on the floor, and I would then put ink, and then I started getting masks from eBay, a little bit sort of like a Duchampian license via shopping. And I started buying also Spanish combs, and I started placing these combs over their heads. And then I wanted also to have a little bit of like it was like a dual thing, like a pose, like when you're going through a TSA machine, to allude to racial profiling, but also like a leaf in a botanical colonial illustration. So it has both like that, it's like multi-determined. So it plays with those ideas. And you have mestiza, castiza, China. There's some terms that still exist until today. This one I traced my daughter. China, like when I was growing up, everybody called me China. It's a very Bogota term. China linda, China querida, ¿cómo estás? That was, and then you realize, oh my God, that is part of it's a caste term, but they still exist in our vocabulary. Torna atrás is turn back, salta atrás. And I sourced these from different places: Colombia, Ecuador, Barbados, Brazil, No Te Entiendo, Cambuja. And I made 16 of them. I have shown these together, separately. And they are like maps. And they're both, to me, you're in that pose where you're suspended, you're vulnerable. But at the same time, I didn't want to be sexualized. I wanted them to be more like maps. And I've been interested in maps, like in the first crochet pieces. The Spanish comb, which kind of is a little bit like the Spanish, the crown, the mask. It's the history that is back there, but that is still present in our lives. Loba, Jiwara. When somebody says they're Jiwaro means you're Puerto Rican. So that still exists today. Loba in Colombia means when you say something is lobo, it means that it has little taste. So you can see the racism in the language, in the naming. So then the naming of the flowers in Latin, the naming of the castas to mean, to degrade, to own in a different way. Tente en el aire, calpa mulata, morisca. And here they are at the Utah Museum. Here we placed them all together, and we had the lighting really low, so it would, in some way, it would be a little bit like a church. And then I was visiting somebody's studio today. I don't know if that student is here. So I kind of have gone into sculpture. I'm an episodic sculptor. So once in a while, when I need a break from painting and cutting and gluing, I run into sculpture. I kind of like, okay, and I put things together a little bit like a collage. And so Charlie had some stones in the studio that he had drawn with lead pencil, and he didn't know what to do with them. And I said, oh, I need some organs for this animal here. And the mask is a mask from the Amazon. And then in my walks through my neighborhood, I picked up some wood, and I thought it looks like a carcass, and I'm going to kill it. And I call it kill, super overkill. Thinking again of what we are doing to nature. Climate change, And then this is called scaffold. You know, thinking of all the eyes on us and just working on pieces that are, now this is called Mamita la Mestiza me llama. Mestiza's calling me. So I took the title from the sign on a cathedral in Pasto, where the barniz de Pasto is made. And it's one of the sites in the world where the Virgin appeared to a little mestiza girl, a girl that was a little indigenous girl, but instead of the girl calling the Virgin, she called the Virgin the mestiza. And I thought that was so interesting of how like where Jesus's paintings in Mexico have indigenous faces, how this little girl named this apparition the mestiza. And so this is a colonial illustration on how the barniz de Pasto was made in the colony. That right is how it's done today, how the tradition lives today, how it has survived. It comes from the Amazon. There are 38 harvesters. I'm sorry, it's 8 harvesters, 38 artisans that still make this work. And in 2020, it was named by UNESCO in need of urgent safeguarding. So I've been doing the research since 2018. And at some point, somebody in Colombia saw the work and said, oh, you would be perfect to work with an artisan. We have this program where we connect artisans and artists together. So this is Mari Ortega, and she's a professional artist of barniz de Pasto. And I sent her my piece, Cornucopia, for her to translate into barniz de Pasto. And so we collaborated through internet, Western Union, WhatsApp, and I made this that is a screen, all made in this ancestral tradition. And what we share, despite the abyss of education, of resources, is the history, the shared history of war, and a cultural DNA that is in both of us. So working together was very easy. And we made a couple of pieces. And this is my studio. So this is how I work in the studio. So I have all these cutouts that I make. At this point, there are thousands of them. And each one I paint, they're research, I copy, I repeat. How many flowers do I need? All the vases come from either colonial paintings, or I have seen them in museums, or even stores in Mexico, in Colombia, current pieces. And I've made these large scale dream map and cornucopia. And they're different from the cornucopia because, again, this idea of where do I lean? Where are my influences? So I've started looking at drawings from the Amazon and thinking of them. So instead of boleros from Luis Miguel, I'm placing these drawings as part of a palimpsest, part of the cultural memory of Colombia, the country where I was born and raised, and placing them in the back. In front are the researched, copied, mimicked flora from the colonial encounter, with pots, again, done in a similar way. And I've created these large-scale works. Each one of these is 135 by 90 inches. They're large-scale. These are details. Again, the Habsburg double-headed eagle from, the European crown, which also happened. That I took that from a piece in Mexico, because that also happened when Europeans were going to Asia. They were saying, well, can you make me this porcelain pot, but can it have can it have the emblem of the crown? And so you have that hybridity, that thing happening between, Europe and Asia happening. And then that pot goes to Mexico. And then that influences the pottery there. Again, the eyes detail. I had done a book with the poet called Farid Matuk, and I put some of the text in this book with his permission. The idea of helicopters, surveillance, and the text is very, it's current to and each piece has a bit of a different feeling. This is Dream Map and Cornucopia with Jaguar. So it's more sensual. Some, for me, I'm thinking about surveillance. Other pieces, I'm thinking about miscegenation. This one is it's more about desire. It's very luscious, it's large, it's sexual. This one, Dream Map and Cornucopia with slaves, I'm thinking of labor. The text from Farid Matuk, tasks that don't really ask for names. And then the figures at the bottom, the backdrop, they are, if you see, they're tied at the neck. And then, but again, I'm thinking about my own art education, and I'm thinking of the relationship, the push and pull relationship in the works of like Jackson Pollock or Bryce Martin, or the work that I was taught, that I would say I was indoctrinated in if I was very radical about how I think about this. But we think about things one day one way, one day the other. The flowers inspired in colonial. This one, Dream Map and Cornucopia with flames. I thought of coca leaves, and coca, in the history of Colombia, coca, we think now of cocaine and the drug wars. But coca, even right now, in the traditional sense and used by indigenous communities, is used for ritual and religious purposes, and it is not cocaine. It is a leaf that is used for religious purposes. So when you think of coca leaves, don't think of it as cocaine. Cocaine is a transformation, a capitalist transformation that completely has corrupted, that it's an erasure of that tradition. And so I decided to put it in this pot and have it with flames. I think about religion and its role in history and what religion has done as kind of a colonial weapon. So I decided to put this kind of family in the back. And the flames, they work a little bit like the flames that are burning the Amazon, but also the flames of the Inquisition and what the Inquisition did through history. And then I put all of these kind of soldiers that have heads that are like targets, and they are targets themselves. So they're cyclops. Dream Map and Cornucopia with Tulipier. I started looking at the different codex that were telling the story of colonization. And so here at the bottom, you have the conquistadors meeting the indigenous people, each one in their garb as warriors. And the second, and the back, all of the flora in the back is cacao, it's chocolate. And so the second tier is an indigenous person with a molinillo, which is for mixing chocolate. I have one at home. The tradition still continues. On the third tier, you have Europeans drinking chocolate. And on the fourth tier, you have basically the naming of it in French. Rameau du cocoa, but it could be a Williams Sonoma beautiful container, right? For me, it's the history of capitalism right there. And then the figures in the back inspired in Amazonic drawings, harvesting. So it's the palimpsest of history. At the top, these two eyes, kind of the witnesses, the figures. Could they be religious? Could it be Adam and Eve? It could be like a house up there. It's a structure that contains. Dream Map at Cornucopia with Quero. And this is inspired. The Queros are basically, this is the OG, the original Barniz de Pasto. This is inspired in an Incan ceremonial cup that was done with Barniz de Pasto back. This could be from the 1600s or 1400s. And it has a narrative that is not European. If you see the clothing, it's like a ruana, a poncho. You can see the depiction of textile. And I decided to, because this depicts textile and like a domestic space, I decided to put the drawing in the back with the lace drawing on top and create, again, like a push and pull. And when I think of the push and pull, is that submission, domination, resistance. Where do they meet? Where do they flow? In and out. And so one is a flowy drawing, and then the other one, it's almost like a inch by, like a pointillist. So again, I'm thinking of formal ways of making work too. How do you create variation? How do you create a piece that is a picture? It's a picture, and how do you make it interesting to look at? Their eyes in the pot, their eyes above. I'm interested in the eyes as kind of witnesses. Then their green eyes, their European eyes. Dream Map and Cornucopia with River. This is like an offering. I did this piece. My uncle had died, and I kind of did it a bit as an offering. So if the personal always gets in, and I would say I'll take this moment to say that I think what happens in all the research is that the work there is research and there is all of that, but there are things that you don't say in the work, but that get in the work invisibly, like, arriving just for your mom's funeral, and you have that loss and you have that pain with you, and you really, that just gets in the work, but you're not making the work exactly about that, but in making the work about something else, that allows, it gets in there. So all of those things that don't exactly belong in the grammar of this work, they're there. The loss, the solitude of migration, the loss of your language, the fact that you actually feel that, you're more intelligent in your native language, the learning to feel like you're more intelligent in your learned language, the stuttering when you don't have a word, all of that is, I think, it gets in there somehow. So the personal is in there, but the historical anchors the work in something that is bigger than you. So this was an offering for my dear uncle. An offering with guayabas, which were drew map and cornucopia with mopa mopa and cicadas. So the mopa mopa is the plant that the barniz de pasto is made with, and that's a pot. That was inspired in the show that I did at the Everson, where I collaborated with the curator picking pots that would go with the show that I was making there. And I picked this pot and then made a piece based on the pot from the Everson collection. So this is a pot from the area of Peru, and mopa mopa is from that area. And then things happen where your history and education, they come in. Like I started making these leaves with holes, and immediately I was thinking, oh, Matisse, like it all gets in there, right? Everything that we know that we have is in there. The botanical illustrations, the cicadas, thinking of Maria Sibylla Marian, who was a female botanical illustrator that went to the Guyana. So it all kind of lives together in your memory, right? Layers kind of go in and out. Dream up on cornucopia with potatoes. These are all the same size, 135 by 90. And again, this has they all have different, like they go into different places. I was thinking of, potatoes are from the ground, so are strawberries. But then you have the moon at the top and the text screaming isn't looking, and then these mythical snakes that come down from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top, that are a bridge between kind of like the earth and the sky. And potatoes are American. The lace again, the lace always comes back. Oh, I'm always in there with the lace is always a place of respite. It's the reiteration of making. Dream up and cornucopia with poppies and irises. Poppies, I think of this piece as a little bit druggy. And then the idea of the woman on the vase with her chauffeur. It's kind of thinking about elitism. That's another one. Okay, and this is one of the last ones. Dream up and cornucopia with green eyes. I photographed these pieces at a craft store in Mexico, and I thought they were fascinating to me because they're for tourists. I gave the pot green eyes, thinking of mestizaje, of miscegenation. I put drones in the back, and then little pot here has, let me go back here, has a nativity scene. So it's kind of like the face being presented forward. It's either, whatever belief is there is not, it's on the side. And it is on the side because if you see the legs on the big pot, they are snakes. So that history that has been tried to be erased for so long, it's there on the side. I'll show you the nativity, but the snakes are in the bottom. The rattlesnakes are there. Then the roses were from a colonial painting. The snakes are there on the cheeks. See, Quetzalcoatl is there, peeking from the cheek. So this was a collaboration with my husband, and his work are all the sculptures in front. They are these acorns done with this sculpture material, and then the stems are all in steel and covered, and they play very well. We did a whole show together like this. So you can see how they look in installation and how they look in relationship to other works. And we just had a show together at the Nemeth Art Center in Park Rapids, Minnesota. And then this is a commission. So I did this plane for Robert and Karen Duncan. They are collectors and they own an aviation company. And they came to my studio and saw those cutouts and they said, we want for you to paint our plane. And I started crying because I couldn't believe it. But I did it. So this is probably the biggest commission I've ever done. And it's all inspired in craft, in Spanish colonial, and in feminism. Because when you think about it, a plane and the plane industry is the most patriarchal that you can imagine. And the plane is a big phallus. And I thought, well, I'm going to decorate this big phallus with flowers and then the inside, I thought it'd be nice if it's a little roomy. And so it's all pink at their design company and chose this beautiful pink leather from Italy and had the work upholstered, all the chairs upholstered in this material. And then we embroidered some flowers. I didn't paint any of this. I didn't touch this. I worked with engineers, with designers, with a lot of people that were very good with upholstery, with painting. This requires, you have to be so, because this thing has to fly and nothing can peel that can go into a mortar or the plane falls. So this was all done. This was done like when you want something embroidered on your jacket. It was done in a company in Lincoln, Nebraska. And this is how the plane looks. It's a 15-seater. I've flown it once or twice with them. And me too. I was like, okay, how much more femi can it get? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. The floor is open for questions, everyone.
Which one was your favorite project and which one took you the longest?
They're all favorite in their moment. Commissions are incredibly anxiety driven because you're always thinking of a client and you're thinking, but I'm always thinking, how do I retain my voice? And how do I how can I get in there and do what I want to do and keep my voice? But how do I do it in a way that is where you're not going to be too forceful or too, or too submissive? See, the same thing applies. It's a push and pull because you're always dealing with somebody that has some power over you. And how do you manage that?
I have a question. I'm curious about your chapters. You're making these walking chapters. Do you see them as a continuation of the work, or how do you see the chapters? Two questions actually. So that's one. Number two, do you also want to talk a little bit about the process?
Yeah.
I'm very curious about there's so much layering.
The what?
There's so much layering.
Yeah.
That's going on, and I'm
curious
about how the visual quality of the paintings themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think of them as interconnected. All the chapters are in some way about the same thing. It's the story. I mean, it's the story about migration. It's basically the statement that Joan read. It's about migration. It's about cultural memory. It's about the legacies of colonization and everything through the prism of feminism and my eye as a woman living in between these two worlds and these two cultures and these two languages. So it's about that, in that making sense of the world. So cornucopia is about, in some way, it's not that different to casa paintings. I'm thinking of the same thing, of how, the destruction of nature is very connected to the classification of botanicals, or racial profiling, or the categorization of humans as if they were plants or animals. It's all interconnected.
So do you think the chapters are done, or do you just keep creating new chapters as
So casta paintings is done. Cornucopia could be done, but that it's also opportunity. So if a museum calls me and says, you know what, that cornucopia piece, and I have to say, well, I'm sorry, that's already in a collection. I can't do anything. Well, can you do a new one? I was like, well, why not? I'll revisit that. But I'll revisit it and something else is going to come out. Like I always revisit lace. Lace is always the place where, in that reiteration, that repetition, there's a calming aspect to it that always takes me back to a place of sort of like calm before, the storm of the next body of work. And the process, I think my process is I'm very interested in the handmade and having the hand being shown and having the hand being very connected to craft processes. So in the Barniz de Pasto, I'm trying to imitate the cornucopia. I'm imitating Barniz de Pasto, but it's also a metaphor of how we learn and how when you migrate, you take your culture with you, with the culture that you are taking with you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I really do appreciate your work. Thank you for sharing all the work. The cornucopia series was especially, I think about them as just in relation to still life painting.
Yeah, entirely.
Within modern histories.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is taking the idea of still life and really embedding it with all of these various histories within your own language and concerns and ideas. And I really kind of like that. Because it still speaks to a painting history that is very familiar.
Yeah.
But then it's quite layered.
Yeah.
That it's beyond just the idea of still life as representations of, flowers and
yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right.